Okay, now, next. Okay, I'm better. Sometimes you just gotta like get that out where like you've got all this stuff in your head. You're like, yeah, we're gonna do this, and then you just gotta stop because there's smoke rolling out of your ears. It's kind of like that. Okay, so welcome to part 2 of the Philosophers. We already talked about Hobbes and Locke. You should have a pretty good understanding of those so far. Today we're diving into Montesquieu, yeah, and Rousseau, Montesquieu, Rousseau. All right. Okay. So let's hop into these guys. Montesquieu is referred to as a balanced Democrat, not to be affiliated with like a party affiliation, more on the lines of like democracy as a nutshell and what it stood for. So Montesquieu, even though we don't talk a lot about him, as you get older, you will hear about Hobbes and Locke. Those names do come up within society and just conversation. You don't hear Montesquieu come up as frequently, which is fascinating because really what Montesquieu ends up contributing to the United States arguably might be more significant solely to the United States versus just like this big umbrella concept of government and society. So first of all, let's get the things out of it. He was born rich. Start there, right? So here's what Montesquieu really believed, and this is what makes him pretty different than Hobbes and Locke. Montesquieu believed that the state of nature, individuals were so fearful that they avoided violence and war. Basically what he said was all humans are spineless creatures, and we're so spineless and we're such scaredy cats that we will avoid violence and war at all cost, okay? So the need for food, Montesquieu said, caused timid humans to associate with others and seeking to live in society. All right, so think way back to humanity as a whole, way back in the beginning, okay? We know there's basic elements that people need to survive. We need food, we need shelter. Those really are the big things, right? So what Montesquieu is saying is the recognition of we need food drew people together because there's strength in numbers, right? If I'm together with more people, think of your nomadic tribes, way back in the day, right? I have a better chance of getting food, therefore I have a better chance of survival, which is pretty essential, right? So when you get a group of people together, immediately we can label that as a society, all right? So here's where it gets kind of interesting. When man enter into a society, when they're grouped together, they lose the sense of that weakness, okay? Equality ceases because everyone's no longer scared of each other, scared of life, right? And then it results in, yeah, you're right, war. Okay, so Montesquieu, pause right here. So Montesquieu says, humans by themselves are timid creatures. By myself, I am spineless, I am scared of everything. I pretty much am just like a blip on the radar screen, right? I'm not really that important and I can't really do much. However, if a human groups together with another human and another human and another human, we build what's called a society from that. Cool? Cool. When we do that, though, we lose the sense of weakness. We lose the sense of being scared because there's strength in numbers. When that happens inherently or automatically, some will rise to the top of leadership, some will not. Because of that, that creates inequality, right? Which we should all be aware of at this point. The minute inequality takes place or equality dies is the minute that we commence into a state of war and conflict. All right, that's Montesquieu's concept as a whole. He said that the state of war among individuals and nations led to laws and government. So to add on to that, humans together in a society create inequality, they create problems, they create war, all right? That's all bad, right? Death is a bad thing. Correct. We want humanity to survive and grow, right? So Montesquieu says, since we know that war inherently happens based on my theory of humans, Montesquieu saying this, here's what we need. We need laws and we need government. Because if these societies are going to exist, and that's inevitable, means it's going to take place no matter what, then to prevent this war thing from happening, we need laws and we need government together to maintain order to prevent war from happening. So Montesquieu said the main purpose of government was to maintain law and order, political liberties are freedoms, basically, and the property of the individual. Again, a big piece on property being important. Understand, Locke, Hobbes, Montesquieu, Rousseau, they're coming from Europe. Europe, when we look at the size of Europe as a continent, is small. Germany is like the size of one of our states, for example. Like, it's hard for us to comprehend, like, it's not a big continent. Because of that, property is so vitally important, especially back in the 14, 15, and 1600s. That's why we hear so much about property. One of the things that makes the US so powerful from the get-go is the fact that we have such access to property. I say we know there's an asterisk next to we, right? Now, here's the other thing about Montesquieu, though. He really liked the English system, England, as their model of government. Like, he said that was the bread and butter, that was the thing. Here's the crazy thing about Montesquieu. He completely interpreted the concept of English government 100% wrong. Yeah, one of our famous philosophers here royally screwed up in his homework, and now we have what we have now because of that error. Follow this. So, Montesquieu wrote an article, a book really, called The Spirit of Laws. And when he wrote it, he said that power in England really resided in Parliament, what we would really consider, like, for us, kind of like Congress, right? A legislation. He thought that the separation of balance of powers is what he was seeing. What he saw was Parliament had some power, the king had some power, all right? So we have executive and we have legislative, two different branches, separate powers, right? So the way Montesquieu saw it, he saw the king was using executive power, but Parliament was balancing that king out, right? Which is divided into House of Lords, House of Commons. For us, think of it like this: Congress, House of Representatives, Senate, right? And they were in check. So they were keeping each other from becoming too powerful. So that's really not how England was working at that time. I mean, sure, all that existed, but the reality is still it was a monarchy. Like, the king still controlled like everything. The executive power was still in control of everything known to mankind. However, because of his mistake of interpretation or mistake of understanding, his, dare I say this, ignorance, because of his ignorance, he actually creates something that many would argue becomes more powerful than what England could even offer. And that becomes the checks and balance system. So Montesquieu ends up creating this theory of saying, like, you have multiple branches of government that keep each other in check, so one branch doesn't become too powerful, right? Now is when you start going, oh, I see how Montesquieu wound up in the Constitution, right? Because the United States has how many branches of government? Right, 3: judicial, executive, legislative. So our branches keep each other in check at all times also. The president can't declare war, right? Congress can. But if Congress tries to declare a war and it's not constitutional, the Supreme Court steps in and goes, nope, not happening. So they all keep each other in check constantly so one branch doesn't become too powerful. That's why national elections in the United States are critical and key for the development of our government, but at the same time, we spend so much time focusing on the president that we forget about the other branches and how much power they really have. Montesquieu said all branches are important, all branches matter, and they keep each other in check, and it needs to be that way. We took that idea from Montesquieu and said, cool, Constitution it is, right? So that's the big thing about Montesquieu. He said people are evil, or not necessarily evil, they're spineless. They get together because they're spineless. They create societies. They kill each other. We need law and order because of that. And there should be a division of political power, 3 branches of government, right? All right. Rousseau. Jean-Jacques Rousseau is not from France. Let's start there. He's from Switzerland. He did travel to France and Italy, but stereotyping, you know. So he described humans in the state of nature as free, equal, peaceful, and happy. Rousseau was like a hippie 100 some odd years before hippies actually existed. He said, you deserve to be free, run away, right? Now, Rousseau also had a bit of a conspiracy theory. I don't know how much of a conspiracy it is, but it is a theory. He was convinced that the powerful rich stole the land belonging to everyone and fooled common people into accepting them as rulers. All right, so Jean-Jacques Rousseau says, land is for everyone, everyone matters, everyone needs to live peacefully, okay? But some people, those who were wealthy, tricked the common person into taking their land. The minute they took that land, those who are wealthy now have the power, okay? So Rousseau concluded that the social contract, so this agreement between citizen and government, is not a willing agreement, but a fraud against people committed by the rich. So Rousseau, if you haven't figured it out yet, not a fan of those who are wealthy, because he believes that those who are rich are those who control everything, and they abuse that power consistently. He did create a document, a political theory called the social contract. His opening line is probably one of the most well-known lines in political science, at least. It is, "Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains." We're born to be free at all times. However, the minute we get into a society, we're locked down and we can't get out of it. The problem in the state of nature was to find a way to protect everyone's life, liberty, and property while each person remained free. Okay, so Rousseau's kind of like in this paradox of like trying to figure out like, what am I supposed to do here? Because we have to make sure everyone has life, liberty, and property, right? Social contract. But at the same time, we have to make sure everybody's free. How do we balance that out? So what he did was, instead of referring to the king as sovereign, as most powerful, he said the people are most sovereign, right? People exercise their general will to make laws for the public good. So what Rousseau is really saying is it's about the populace as a whole. That's the most valuable piece. That's the highest value. It's about the people. It's about them working together to create a society for themselves. It's not just about one person, right? Rousseau says, stop being greedy. It's not about greed. You put greed into the equation, everybody loses. Rousseau argued that the general will of people cannot be decided by elected representatives. He believed a direct democracy where everyone voted. All right. So Rousseau is where we get this difference about the United States. Remember, the United States is not a democracy. It's not. I will fight people. It's not a democracy. It's not a republic. It's neither one of those two. It is a democratic republic. It's a one-of-a-kind kind of deal, right? And part of that is highlighted by Rousseau in saying that it is important for all people to vote. It's important for all people to have a voice and to express the general will on what takes place, right? So, knowing that, Rousseau was a huge fan of this idea of a direct democracy, which means every single person votes, every vote counts. You're not being represented by other people, right? So we get a little bit of Rousseau in our government. We can even look at the national election with the Electoral College. The Electoral College, the popular vote matters, or every vote does matter. It goes toward the electorate, though, who represent the people to get the president, right? So that first piece, that all vote piece that matters, that piece is from Rousseau. Your local and state elections, that's Rousseau, where every voice matters. When you're voting on a bond issue for a school, or you're voting for a new interstate, that's not really a thing, but let's say it is, or you're voting to fund fire departments, libraries, sewers, whatever the case may be, all those local and state elections, governor, representative, those are all solely popular votes. Those are not representative. That is an example of direct democracy. So we adopted Rousseau's concept in our government as citizens, but in its own unique way. It's not a winner take all for everything. There's exceptions to it. Moving on with him, he said political power must reside within the people. We actually find Rousseau, like the most impact that we find from Rousseau is actually right in the beginning of the U.S. Constitution where it says, we the people. That's Rousseau. Now, he didn't literally write that, but like if you want to know where Rousseau is in our Constitution, the first three words is Rousseau, because it's saying that the power of the government resides in the populace, the people, not just one person, not just a group of people, but the society as a whole. The other thing Rousseau that was very impactful from him was also when it came to, interestingly enough, church and state. He believed in this time in Europe, there was a huge influence between religion and how the state governments function. State governments meaning like the national governments function. They were kind of in cahoots a lot of the time. There's a lot of conflict because of that. So Rousseau believed that religion, not one, just religion, should be divided from the state government. He said it's impossible to live in peace with people you think are damned, meaning it's impossible for you to work with someone else that your religious beliefs say are condemned to pick wherever you're sending them off to, right? He favored a civil religion, but concentrated the sacredness of the social contract. So Rousseau is saying, religion, cool. In my own world, it's important. I'm going to keep it here. But it's not going to interfere with the public. It's not going to interfere with how society functions. These two ideas have to stay separate. So we actually take Rousseau also in this instance, and that's why in the United States there's a clause that is the separation of church and state inside our society, meaning that religions, plural, all of them, are not like, they don't influence what takes place in the public sector. We see that very clearly inside of our schools. At least we should. But remember, a school is publicly funded. It's maintained by the state government. That means it falls within the world of government, right? So that also means that if you're inside a public institution as a student, you're not going to have a teacher or an administration or even a board of directors or anybody that's going to say, if you're going to be in this school, you have to represent this one religion and that's it. Otherwise, you can't be here. We can't do that. That's a separation of church and state issue. We find it tried in Supreme Court in the early 1900s. Students used to pray to begin school each day. That was taken to court and it was deemed unconstitutional. And part of that was because, boom, the separation of church and state clause that was originated from Jean-Jacques Rousseau. All right. So tons of information in this, like a lot of information through Montesquieu and Rousseau. That's why I divided it into two sections. All right. Go back through this, rewatch it if you need to. I highly recommend to write things down when you're listening because there's a lot of content between Montesquieu and Rousseau. And now, once you've completed this, you have all four sections. You now have Hobbes, Locke, Montesquieu, and Rousseau. All right, congratulations. You've made it through learning about the four philosophers. Now, most likely you're going to wind up putting it to practice. So, good luck on whatever comes your way.